Agora, para falar para nós sobre Do Brands Still Matter, Michael Moon, Logistics Inc.
Thank you. Cheers. All right. Well, I'd like to begin my presentation after lunch with a story. And it took place when I was 16, 17 years of age. And I lived in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And when I was 16, I went to a record shop and I bought my first ever jazz record album. And I asked the clerk, who kind of had long hair and he definitely looked like he had been smoking something. And I asked him for a recommendation as far as a jazz group I might, a kind of a modern jazz group I might. And he directed me to this record called Forest Flower by a now well-known quintet called the Charles Lloyd Quintet. And I took it home and I listened to it, and it was really eye-opening, ear-opening, mind-opening. I went, wow, that's really cool. And then I had heard that the Charles Lloyd Quintet would come to San Jose State, which is the university where I lived. So I went to the concert, and it was remarkable. It was the most extraordinary jazz concert I'd ever seen. But there was this piano player, and he would play this. He was just kind of like one of the guys in the band, because Charles Lloyd played a saxophone. And as this piano player from time to time would cut, just have a little solo and do off these chordal riffs, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There was something unworldly, something extraordinary, something unspeakable about these little 10, 15, 20-second musical riffs. And then I went back and I says, who's this Keith Jarrett guy? And then I heard that he had gone off a couple years later, had gone off and recorded a solo album called The Cologne Concert. And I put it on my record player, and it moved me, as it still does today. And it was like, wow, this from an album. And so 40 years ago, I made a promise, and to investigate what actually happened when I put that record on. And the essence of it, the essence of what happened is the essence of a great brand. And as best I've gotten it today, somehow when I was listening to the music, I had burst out of my shell into this larger realm of imagination. And in this expanded realm of imagination, I somehow touched or connected with the imagination of Keith Jarrett. This is the essence, I believe. This is the essence, I believe, of a great brand. That an innovator comes up with a great product, and in his or her imagination, reaches out into the netherworld, and somehow customers connect their imagination with the innovators, or the storyteller, or the artist. So my presentation today is really about, do brands still matter? Well, the short answer is yes, but the nature of brand will undergo a really remarkable transformation. So I'd like to take you on a journey today, and part of that journey I'd like to take you on requires an act of faith on your part. I'd like you, each one of you, to join in me and step into this realm of all possibility, where anything and everything is possible simply by your say-so. So in this realm of all possibility, your word is law. Whatever you say, it is. So I ask that you step into this realm and dream with me today, and hopefully we'll discover something that we forgot. So, what will we do today? We'll talk a little bit about a brand, the traditional one and the transmedia one. We'll talk about how do brands differ, whether it's a B2B firm or a B2C firm or a retail firm. We're really focusing on what I'll call the customer engagement. And then we'll look at a couple innovations that I think will continue really to affect how we think about brands, how we create them, how we manage them, how we participate in them. And then finally, we'll look at the two of the most overlooked aspects of strategy. What's a brand? Well, let's start off with a basic, classic, textbook, traditional notion of a brand. And I separate out buyer motivations from seller motivations. And for the most part, we all get confused because we tend to focus on brands from our set of motives. You know, it's about differentiation, simplified messaging. But for the most part, customers don't give a crap about that stuff. What they care about is, have you simplified my choice? Have you helped reduce the risk? And ultimately, it's about who I am. So we're going to spend a little more time talking about what is this notion of self-identity as it relates to brands. Now, this is a model that reflects, in this model, I've tried to distill about 20 years of research, thousands and thousands of hours in workshops in the area of cognitive science, neurolinguistic programming, Ericksonian hypnosis, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I try to answer the question, why do customers buy? Why do they engage? And in the model, I characterize things in terms of impact on the purchase decision, as well as the level of awareness. How aware am I of why I'm buying this? And so the stuff that we're most conscious about are rationalizations. They're after the fact. Now, the most recent brain imaging research says that your brainstem, your limbic system, will say, I want it. And it'll take about 6 to 7 seconds for it to move up to your neocortex to justify what you want. So that's what the brain imaging says. So then we have, if you will, fads, trends, self-identity. And these roughly map to our neocortex, the rational, logical mind, the cortex, what was sometimes called the mammal mind, which is where stories live, story logic. And then we have the limbic system, basically where we have basic pattern matching called, so first of all, when we walk into a room, the first thing that our monkey mind or our lizard brain mind asks, is there a threat to my survival? Now, by the way, Walt Disney was the first major artist to really harness the limbic system. And he engaged a psychologist to come up with, well, what constitutes a threat as perceived by a 6-year-old? And a psychologist says, well, anything that's big, loud, fast, hard-edged, and loud. So think of a saber-toothed tiger, you know, a rogue elephant, big, large, fast. So he says, okay, I'm going to create the antithesis of what constitutes a threat. And that's the underlying creative brief for Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is the ultimate safe guy. And that's because he knew that he was telling stories to elicit from kids something that they would identify with. Now, really to bring this home, I'd like to kind of tell a story. There's a book that you might want to check out. It's called The Culture Code. Culture Code, by a Frenchman. I don't speak French, so I'm only going to mangle it up. But it's Clotaire, C-L-O-T-A-I-R-E, Clotaire Raphael, culture code. And what he's done is he's developed a research methodology for accessing how customers experience brands at all three levels. And he says this third hour, this limbic system, he calls it the third hour of the focus group, where the lights are down, and he induces a light hypnotic trance, puts people in, and it has them go back to when they were 6 years old, and then starts to describe their experience of various things associated with brands. And what he tells us is that each country will install a survival kit at the limbic system, which is why the jokes that are funny in Brazil are not funny in Argentina, which is why the jokes that are not funny in Argentina make no sense in Mexico. That's because the limbic system was programmed differently. So, first and foremost, the takeaway on this is that brands speak at all three levels. And the place that we most often get it wrong is at the most basic and necessary level. So let me tell you a story to really kind of personalize this. So I graduated in 1975 from university, and I found myself in Silicon Valley, kind of knocking around, and ultimately I got my first job a couple of years later selling binding equipment from a company called VeloBind. And this entailed talking to marketing directors in all of the Silicon Valley firms, Hewlett-Packard and Tandem and Literonix and a bunch of Intel. And I remember I was just having a devil of a time getting in front of the directors and vice president of marketing. And in those days, they all had secretaries, and their secretaries would take one look at me and they'd like go, get the hell out of here. And I had a nice suit on, I had a nice tie, I had a really nice leather briefcase. And so I was talking with a friend of mine, who would later become a girlfriend 3 or 4 years later. And her name is Denise, and she took a moment and says, "Oh, it's your shoes. What's the matter with my shoes? They're shit." And I said, "What cut?" So what's the first thing that women look at when you walk in the office? And I said, "Wait a minute, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, when a strange man walks into a business office, the first thing the secretary looks at are your shoes." And I said, "What's so important?" "Well, she has 2 questions. Are you somebody I'd like to date? And are you at, below, or above the social status of my boss?" So I said, "Okay, I'm game." So I went to the best men's store, one of the best men's stores in North America, happens to be located in San Francisco, in no small part because of the large gay population in San Francisco. And I went and I got a pair of Italian, called wingtips, but that was as close as I was going to ever get to a Ferrari on my foot, okay? And I paid $475 in 1977, okay? So that's like a $2,000 pair of shoes today, okay? So, I'm an experimenter. I'm going to throw myself into the laboratory of life, see what kind of results I get. So I go into the same damn offices. Same goofy grins, same ties, same jackets, same suits, same everything, except I was now wearing some really cool shoes. Night and day difference. Night and day difference. "Oh, Mr. Moon, Mr. Johnson will be right out. May I get you a cup of coffee? Would you like a donut with that?" Boom! So what I'm trying to tell you is that part of our brain is always scanning, and that in order for brands to work, we have to speak to the limbic system, and ultimately we're speaking to who I am in terms of what group I belong to, what my personal experience is, and what's my worldview. Now, there's a thread that came through this morning. Okay, two speakers this morning said that Facebook has 600 million users on it, and easily project that within a year or two it'll be 1 billion. Within 4, it'll be 2 billion. Okay? Did you know that according to Facebook, 115 million of those 600 plus go to Facebook 75 times a day? I'll say that again. They go to their page 75 times a day. Now, if you just factor in, I got to sleep at least 6 hours, I got to bathe, got to go to the, all the basic kind of thing. That means that. So here's the big distinction, like the flat world versus the round world. Facebook is no longer a destination. It's no longer something that you go to. It is quite literally where I come from. Facebook is as important as a pair of glasses to a severely impaired person. Now, this has some profound implications. One, you're going to find your customers first in Facebook. 2, Facebook is one big reputation management system. Reputation is a terrible thing to waste. 3, if you do not have a mobile Facebook app, you're just a poser. If you don't have a mobile Facebook app, you're just not in the conversation. Okay. Made my point. Okay, let's talk about how brands live in what I call brand space. Now, as you can see from the graphic, we've got something going on here in the middle, which I'll explain a bit. And we've got these bands, these rings, distrusted brands, ambivalent brands, trusted brands, and so on. Well, I'd like to tell 2 stories that explain, that really illustrate, anchor, and make personal and concrete how brand space works. Because this will be essential in terms of how we start to reimagine our branding strategy. So the first one came from Dr. Brenda Laurel. Now, I've met Dr. Brenda Laurel in 1997-ish in Crested Butte, Colorado, 7,000 feet up, at the Digital Storytelling Festival. We had people all around the world coming and sharing how they were using CD-ROMs and DVDs and the web to tell stories. Needless to say, I was quite interested. Anyway, she gave a paper. Now, Dr. Brenda Laurel was one of the first people from MIT Media Labs to get a PhD, and she did her thesis on how theater, all the stuff we know about theater, provides everything that we need to know about user interfaces and user experience. Now, it's no surprise that all of that 7 of the top 10 best-selling interactive CD-ROMs in the 1990s were all done by theater majors, professional theater producers, writers, or performers. So, if you want to really understand quote-unquote user experience, you'll start with Aristotle. You'll start with poetics. It has a beginning, middle, and end, a protagonist, an antagonist, some conflict. Okay? So she was saying, well, I did this other little side project, she said, on why girls don't play video games. Now, this was radical. This was like 1997. And she said, I spent 5 years at Xerox PARC, then later Interval Research, investigating, 1, do girls play games? And if so, why? And if not, why not? And are these games similar or dissimilar from the kind of games that boys play? And this entailed surveying 50,000 girls around the world in terms of what do they do with their time. And here's what she found. She found, first of all, that the psychologists and the sociologists and developmental specialists in children have discovered that we, as human beings, play games as part of our social identity construction. We quite literally assemble our social self, our social persona, through gameplay. Now, for the first 6 years of life, boys and girls play essentially the same kind of game, imaginary role-playing games. Okay? I'll play Army, you play Fort, you play House. So what'll happen is, I learn to tell a story that induces you to step into my storyline, and I then experience, as only a kid can experience, reciprocity. Oh, I gotta go fucking play House now. So literally, kids learn how to play nice through collaborative storytelling. Lesson for brand managers. Every brand tells a story. Your story has a logic to it, an emotional logic. And that emotional logic has to make sense to the 6-year-old in each of us. If your story does not engage the emotional logic of the 6-year-old in your customer, you've lost your customer. Okay. So then she goes on to say that about ages 7 or 8, boys and girls go off to play 2 different kinds of games. Now, guys, we go off and we play these games organized by a social dynamic called one up, one down, I win, you lose. Which is why guys, boys, guys, men, guys, love games with clear winners and losers. Crash and burn, shoot 'em, war, all that kind of stuff. And guys will choose their friends based on one criteria, dominant criteria. On a good day, I'll beat you. On a bad day, I lose. So we're more or less easily matched. They got détente. Okay? Now, boy games create power hierarchies. So the more you go up in the hierarchy, the more you win across context. Or another way of saying that, boys achieve prestige through dominance. Okay. Now, it turns out, by the way, that what I just described is a perfect example of corporate hierarchies and why the CEO is always a surrogate dad. That's another story for another day. Now, let's talk about girl games. Girls find games of one up, one down, I win, you lose, stupid. And so she was saying, well, what was it? This, you know, and the girls say, well, I don't know who these people are. There's no backstory. I have no emotional investment in this. So why do I care whether you live or die? In fact, this is a stupid game altogether. Now, it turns out that girls develop their social identity with a fundamentally different dynamic. It's called affinity disaffiliation. Okay, now how does that work? Well, I like you, therefore I can't like you. Which explains that age-old question, why do girls love playing in groups of 3? So they can practice leaving someone out. Alex, are you here? So now, girls accrue prestige not through dominance, but through sharing secrets. And who are best friends for girls? They are 2 girls in whom each other they have shared all their secrets. Now you say, okay, well, that's all very fine and nice, Michael, but how does that relate to marketing brands? Having a customer opt in and share personal information follows the same path that every girl took. Internet marketing is one big girl game. Everything that a girl just knows that is moral, right, and good applies to how to attract, serve, and keep profitable customers for life through the medium of the internet and the participatory media of Facebook and Twitter. Okay. So the most important thing I can tell you about this trust networks is that ultimately, in terms of who should have the final say in terms of what we do or do in the customer relationship, that person should probably have an X chromosome instead of a Y chromosome. We're just wired differently, us guys. So women, I urge you I'm acknowledging that you have an intrinsic leadership in leading your firms to do right by your customer. And all those things that intuitively you just know are right, they're right. Even though your boss may, you're right. Okay, so now let me talk about another story to really bring home this trust base. This is the story of Shannon. Now, if you were here last year, you probably would have heard this. Now, Shannon at the time was 12, 13 years old, as related to me by her father, Gary. So they're driving to the store to buy an iPod as a Christmas present for their mom. And as they're driving down the road, he turns to Shannon and says, "Do you suppose Mom would like to have an MP3 player? Because, you know, it's got more features." "No, Dad, she wants an iPod." As only a sassy 13-year-old girl could say to her dad. And Gary's a totally cool guy. He says, "Oh, really? Well, how do you know that?" "Well, she's always borrowing mine." Gary tells me, "Yeah, it's a rather sage remark for a 13-year-old to make about customer preferences." "Well, what do you think about this new Microsoft Zoom?" "Oh, Dad, you don't know anything about brands." Now, Gary has a PhD, taught at Harvard Business School. One of his first jobs out of college, he worked as an executive VP at Disney. Disney World Orlando was his project. He did all the basic deals with Coke and GM and Kodak, opted out of the entertainment industry, ran $1 billion divisions of Philips. He truly has forgotten more about brands than I'll ever know, and I wrote a book on it, right? So his 13-year-old daughter is now saying, "Dad, you don't know anything about brands." So then he says, "Well, what don't I know?" "Well, Dad, everyone knows that if you have to advertise it, something's wrong with it." Ooh, that one continues to echo. "Dad, if you have to advertise, something's wrong with it." So Gary, being Gary, God bless him, he says, "Well, how do you find out about stuff?" "Oh, well, I hear about something, you know. Usually I get a text, but I hear about something. I go online, I check it out, I do Google, I do Hakia, which is her search engine of choice. She looks how well, she says, well, I see how well it's rated, who said what about it, and then I talk with my girlfriends, and if they've heard about it, I know it's cool." Now, if we just kind of take that little gift apart and say, what's she really sharing with us? One, advertising is not just lipstick on pigs, it's toxic lipstick on pigs. She has no interest. In fact, it is lame. You are communicating that you've got a lame product if you're advertising. Now, I know you have to advertise, but I'm overstating something to make one clear point. One, she doesn't get advertising. In fact, any brand promotion message that comes to her comes through this wicked filter called the social media space. It gets vetted. And if there's anything hinky, if there's anything weird, if there's anything like not right, you're busted. Now, the other thing is that she checks in with her girlfriends. And if they've heard about it, it's cool. Now, what does that mean? It means that, now, here's another little interesting thing. I was talking with a colleague of mine who has a 14-year-old daughter, and I said, "Diane, I bet your daughter gets 75 text messages a day." And she says, "No, you're wrong." And I went, "Ooh, amazing." So I know exactly how many messages she gets a day. She gets 4,000 text messages a month. Okay, so if we were to go in and text mine that stream of text. One of the things that we'll discover is that Shannon no longer considers herself an isolated ego stuck inside a bag of skin with history. She is part of a crew, what I call a cognitive crew. And it'll be 4, 5, 6, 7, no more than 8, but 4, 5, or 6 people who she text messages 50, 70, 100 times a day. And she will not really ever take any major decision in terms of what to buy without accessing the collective wisdom, the collective intelligence of her crew. Now, in her crew, there's going to be a division of cognitive labor. Somebody's going to be wicked smart with data and logic. There's going to be somebody who's wicked smart with emotional intelligence in terms of how it feels and empathetic modeling of other people's responses. There's going to be another person who's going to be wicked smart about design and negative space. Here's the takeaway. We are now marketing to crews, not individuals. So if your market is 30 years, or if your market is younger than 30 years of age, you have to market to the crew. And it has to be cool. Okay, so that really calls attention to the notion of multimodal contact, which means to say I'm going to interact with the crew, not across just multiple channels, but multiple modes of engagement. Mobile apps, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Okay. Oh, by the way, a colleague of mine, Trey Clevenger, said he does these. He's a company called Target Base, one of the leading firms in North America on this next generation engagement marketing. And he says they do extensive database analysis. And he says, our data now shows conclusively that the average person a day visits no more than 12 websites on a regular basis. And Facebook is the #1 or #2 website. So he says, if you're going to engage your customer, you're going to engage him or her first at Facebook. And if you've got a rotten reputation at Facebook, that's it. Game, set, match. You're lame. Okay. Oh, one other thing. Jeff earlier said today it was 70% of people watch. Actually, the data comes from the UK, and it's 75% of people 25 or younger watch TV with a second screen. They say they're watching it with a laptop computer or a mobile phone. And that they use that, and what they quite literally are doing are creating a second narrative that's part of the entertainment. So think about it. Tomorrow's consumers now consider the back channel communication as important or more important than the thing they're watching on TV. So that says, just a little thought balloon here, that means that we need to understand social media monitoring and sentiment analysis as a function of looking at Twitter streams, Facebook news pages, and other forms of instant messaging. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about brands. So this came out of the work that I did with Nokia, and I know that I'm probably running late at this point, so we're going to kind of just skip through this other than to say there is an inherent architecture to a brand. You got voice, value, presentation, and feelings, and each one of those is going to relate to a brand voice, a value proposition, concrete elements, and tonality. So the question then is, what's the organizing principle for a great brand? Well, I'd like to share a story from a personal story. In the early 80s, I had my own advertising agency in Silicon Valley. And by luck, I happened to have, the designer that I used was a fellow named Mark Anderson. Now, it turns out that Mark Anderson was the hot designer in Silicon Valley. And in fact, it was his shop that did the initial branding for the Macintosh. Remember the little colored Picasso-like drawing and all that really kind of really light European modern stuff going on? That was all Mark. And so I was doing the initial brand identity program for SideQuest. And so I was in his office, and one morning I walk in, and he says, "Psst, Michael, you want to see something cool?" And I said, "Sure." And over here was a placard that had a rough burlap sack over it, and he peels it back, and on here were 8 business cards. But they weren't business cards, but they were 8 things that looked like business cards. And he says, "Steve," i.e., Steve Jobs, "Steve wants a personal card." And I said, "Why does he need a card? What's wrong with Apple Computer co-founder? I mean, if that's not a ticket to ride, I don't know what is." And he says, "Well, you know, he was single, and he was really out there." And he said, "Well, he wants to give a lady that he meets, he wants to give her a personal card so that, you know, they can have a conversation later. But specifically, he doesn't want her calling into Apple, getting into the secretarial pool, and to have the flavor of the week become the gossip among all the secretaries." So he had his own private answering system. And so Mark says, I asked Mark, "Well, what was the creative brief for this?" And here's quite literally what he said. He said, "Well, Steve told me he wants something that is unimaginable." And he said, "Mark, I want this to be the best bleepity-bleep work that you've ever done in your bleepity-bleep life. I want this to be over the top. I want you to look back on this 20 years from now and say, that was the best piece of creative work I did in my career." Okay? And then he says, "Mark, then come up, expense is no object." Expense is, how many times we love hearing that, right? Expense is no object. And then it says, "Okay, I want you to put them down. I want you to sit with it for 2 days, and then I want you to burn it. And then I want you to come back and do something that you can't even imagine in your wildest imagination doing. I want that." You want to know where iPads come from, and iPods and iPhones? It comes from that kind of, I want that. Okay? So then I said, "Well, yeah, Mark, what card would you like?" And there was this one over here, kind of, you know, colors and, you know, cute. And he says, "No, that's not what you got." He says, "What one do you get?" He's third down on the right. It's black, it's gray, it's opalescent. It's got these little teeny little geometric shapes: red, cadmium yellow, purple, indigo. 8 matched colors, 2 varnishes. So it went through a 4-color press 3 times. And I looked at it, and there was and all was there in 6-point type: 415, 332, something, something, something. That was it. And I said, "Mark, where's his name?" He says, "Well, it's Steve's opinion that if he gives this to someone and they can't fucking remember who gave it to him, I don't want her fucking calling me." By the way, that's almost verbatim what he said. So if I don't mean to offend any people here, but that's what he said. So, what is the creative brief of that? It isn't the card, it's the relationship. And if I have not imprinted, if I have not had that kind of connection, I don't want you calling me. Now that is the essence of cool in brand. It's about the relationship, not about the mark. Yes, and it is a key tenet of girl games. Okay. This one comes out of my work with Chief Marketing Officer at Nokia, Anzi Vanyoki. And he said, "Michael, we have this great brand, Nokia, connecting people, but I need it now taken to another level such that it's a teachable, learnable system. And so I says, okay, well, great, let's work on that. And out of this, I came up with this basic model. And let me just quickly run through the model. Every brand has at its core a satisfaction. Now, when it's working well, it's about service. I feel served. When it's not working well, it's simply about gratification. Every brand creates a relationship. Now, I've made that case already, yeah? When it's working well, I feel a member of a community. When it's not working well, it's a user-abuser relationship. Friggin' Microsoft, you know? There's an interaction, a story. Now, typically what happens is we get carried away with the story. Oh, by the way, all of you who are busily writing this down, I make this thing available. Arizona will have it on their site someplace, right, Bernardo? Yes. Okay, so let me tell a story really to kind of illustrate how this works. Just north of San Francisco, there's an area called Marin County. And in Marin County, there's this wonderful little area called Tennessee Valley. And it's about a 1.5-mile walk from the parking lot to the Pacific Ocean. And I use it as kind of a walking, meditation, constitutional. And so one Sunday morning, I'm walking along, and and my energy envelope is just stretching out. And then all of a sudden, over in the periphery, I notice there are these two young women, kind of 30-ish, and typical California preppy girls. They had the little Banana Republic outfit on, you know, the little khaki shorts and little white shoes, little balls, you know, on the thing, and a little pink or a pastel kind of little T-shirt on with a matching little sweater kind of strategically draped over, you know, with a little hat and their little blonde ponytails picking out. And they're walking along, and she says, I just bought an iMac. Well, excuse me, he says, I just bought a computer. What kind did you get? She says, I bought an iMac. And there was this visible shudder of delight in her body. Now, this was 1998, right? It was, ooh, what is that? What is that? That's not rational, but there it is, it's empirical. So somehow there is an intrinsic satisfaction to her buying her iMac. Or another way of saying that is, no amount of advertising will induce a dog to eat bad dog food. No amount of advertising is going to fix a broken product. So, with this particular thing, I'd like to do an experiment. How many people were here last year for the ITM? Handful? Cool. How many people were here 3 years ago for the first ITM? Handful again. Great. Well, of course you were. You work here. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment that ITM is a brand. And so I'd like you to step into that realm of all possibility, where anything and everything is possible simply by your say-so. And as we begin to do this, just look around the room. Just look to your left, look to your right, and just look at someone. Just kind of turn around, look at someone in the eyes, and just go, oh, I see you. Now, in your mind, just say, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Now, imagine that we spent the next hour and a half where we went around all one-on-one, and we just said, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Now, you can imagine how the energy in the room would change, right? It would grow closer. Now, imagine that we'd done that, and that each one of us was like a point of light, kind of in this space. And that as any time we kind of looked at one and said, thanks for being here, there was a little pulse of light. Went, and anytime we kind of just nodded at someone, different colored light. So imagine the totality of all those points of light pulsing, I'll say it out loud, pulsing the experience of love, of being loved. So now imagine this orb. We stand back and we say, in my imagination, let's give it sentience. Let's give it a soul. Let's give it an intellect. Let's give it language. So now we're going to have a conversation with ITM 3. The first thing we want to know is, hi, thanks for being here. What's your name? Tell me, what's the name of this body that we've created here? Shout it out, whoever has it. Sorry? Okay. Ronaldo. Fine. So, Ronaldo, in planning this next year, what could we do to make this better? Oh, more small group interactions. Okay. What else could we do? More time to socialize. Okay. What else could we do? Well, I think people would like to have the presentations downloaded beforehand, so if they wanted something to have in their hand to make notes on, they'd have that. Got it. Now, you notice how the room feels a little differently right now? So what we were doing, in our imagination, we conjured each one of us as a point of light that acknowledged and appreciated each other, and gave that body a soul, sentience, language, intellect, conversation, personality. So now, in our imagination, we can have a conversation with. Now, imagine there's a whole bunch of points of light in Ronaldo that are next year's participants. And by the way, that's okay, because in our realm of imagination, that's totally okay, if you say so. So now imagine for a moment that you could have a direct, meaningful relationship and conversation with customers of your brand 5 years from now. So the customers that would become customers 5 years from now, if you say so, you can be in relationship with them now, and you can structure and focus a conversation with customers that don't even know you yet. And then ask them, how may I serve you? How would you like me to reach out and touch you? That is the imagination of the marketing of the 21st century. It's no more lipstick on pigs. It's no more spray and pray. It's no more of this horseshit thrown against the wall and hoping it doesn't stink too much. It's, I love you. We're in relationship. Coach me. Coach me on how to serve you. That is the soul of a brand. A conversation that initially we start in our imagination with not only our existing customers, but our customers to be. And that is how Steve Jobs is able to say, not this, not that, not that, and you end up with something that is the best work of my career. Okay? So, a transmedia brand basically says, it doesn't matter. This relationship that we have, it spans not only all media, but all modalities. So the store footprint, the cuisine, the apparel, the brand, the website, they all came from that same singular voice of the brand. So transmedia is really about coherence. How do we maintain coherence? High signal-to-noise ratio, messages, with customers that are now, as well as those that are in the process of becoming customers. So, transmediation of brands is, I believe, where we're headed. As we have consumer motives, we also have the same things in business. And that fundamentally, if we do business-to-business marketing, yes, of course, we have to make a business case, an investment analysis that justifies a purchase decision. Yes, it needs to fit the corporate game, you know, make the boss look good, don't look bad, get something done without violating rule number 1 or number 2, right? Business model and cultural norms. So let me tell you one story about cultural norms to really illustrate this. I have a friend, Wade Yee, and he works at Hewlett-Packard. He's in the Hewlett-Packard labs now. But when I met him, he was the director of business development for Asia Pacific. And I had just got back from Shanghai, and my mind was just filled with all these perceptions and notions. And he says, well, let me take you to lunch, because you know, I'd like to hear from you your impressions of my country. So we went to lunch, and I said, Wade, you know, China, it's unimaginably large. It's dense. There's a whole lot going on there that I know that I only just scratched the surface. And it seemed to me that everything was just on the verge of breaking out into mass chaos. And he says, how do you get anything done there? He says, oh, well, let me tell you a story. He says, before I joined Hewlett-Packard, I worked for a value-added reseller selling computer-aided design for textile manufacturing. And he met with this one Chinese entrepreneur, and they put together this plan to do a complete factory automation, $4.5 million systems integration job. And Wade turned to this older gentleman and said, cool, let's do it. Or the entrepreneur says, good, let's do it. So then Wade says, well, let me go back to my office and draw up a project plan. Because he's a good engineer, right? Now, in China, it's just the opposite of Brazil. In China, there's no touching. There's no touching. There's no touching. I'll say it again. There's no touching in China. It's just really bad manners. You want to piss somebody off? Touch them. So this 75-year-old successful entrepreneur, Wade standing here, goes, whew, what do you mean project plan? You are my project plan. And the top of my head blew off, because in that one gestalt I got that, first of all, whatever you put on paper is worthless. You take one step into this miasma, into this hurricane of chaos. You look around, you recalculate the plan. You take one more step. The only thing that counts in China is the personal relationship and the promise that you made not to look bad. Okay? So the cultural norm of doing business in China is paper's meaningless, it's the promise you made. And now I know that you know. We know together that you have no idea how you're going to be able to do this. I know that. But the thing I do know is I can count on you to take one step and figure it out. Take another step and figure it out. Now, the reason I tell that story is every company has a set of social norms, cultural norms. That's how companies buy what they buy. So if you're doing business transactions, it's all about the cultural norms, criteria, beliefs, and values. Just like relationships are all about who I am socially. So as we kind of apply this, I'm having a conversation with Chuck Porter of Crispin Porter Bogowski. Had the Burger King North America Burger. They did the subservient chicken ad. Remember the subservient chicken? It's good to be king. So these were ads that you look at them and go, that's totally wacky. Just wacky. And I asked Chuck, well, how do you get clients to sign off on such wacky creative? And he says, well, I'll tell you how we do it. My creative team creates 4 to 5 viral videos a week. We post them anonymously to YouTube. and then we track how often they got uploaded, syndicated, commented on, and then we take all of that and do sentiment analysis on what conversation it elicited. And specifically, we're tracking on boys 14 to 24. Okay? So then he says, then we sit down with our client. And Michelle, we tell Michelle, because it's a she, we tell Michelle, look, Michelle, remember, our demographic is boys 14 to 28. She goes, yes. And before we show you the ad, I want you to look at the data. Here's the data. And it's massive traction, 14 to 24-year-old boys. By the way, the criteria for successful viral video of 14-year-old boys. Now, I learned this from my friend Igor Bucher in La Comunidad in Netherlands. You might know Igor. And I can't, and perhaps you can do the translation into Dutch, because it sounds much better in Dutch. But it's horrific, humorous, or horny. And if you can get humorous and horny together, boom, you got a viral video. Now, we have banks and insurance companies doing the same thing. So you just think it's just about consumer. No. Some of the most successful B2B marketing programs have been viral videos. Okay. So the point here is, and Suresh made the case earlier today, as did Jeff, and the other person. And that is, data really clarifies what's in the conversation. And that viral video and sentiment analysis is a great way of doing what I call open source ideation of stories that connect. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're in the business of doing, is figuring out how to connect with various kinds of customers. So let's talk a little bit about a business model. And again, I'm not gonna, we could really do an all afternoon seminar just on this one graphic. But I want to really call attention to a couple, three things. One is a business model derives from operational capabilities, you know, who's doing what, engagement infrastructure, how do we attract, serve, and how do we attract, serve, and satisfy profitable customers for life. And then we have a portfolio or a product customer fit. How well is our products? Now, the two things I want to use this chart for to talk about is two things. One is this notion of right to win. Now, a right to win basically means that I've got a product that fits customer requirements. Many companies try marketing things they have no right to win. Okay? So, I was having a conversation with Jeff just the other night about how Apple didn't have the right to win the iPod, the initial iPod. And I said, oh, Jeff, you're mistaken. I said, first of all, the iPod is really an expression of a 13-year-old girl's bedroom. And frankly, the iMac owns the 13-year-old girl bedroom computer market. Secondly, it's about what's cool. Apple was already cool. Third, it was about the music value chain, and virtually every piece of music that comes to the value chain is done on a Mac using Pro Tools. So, and the game set match on that was iTunes, and more specifically, the metadata underneath it vis-a-vis Grace Note. So, some companies have a right to win in markets, and most don't. But the thing I want to call attention to is this notion of operational capabilities. So Suresh this morning and Ramek this morning talked about how marketing automation really comes down to people and process. Now, I have personally interviewed over 100 companies who have attempted to deploy MRM and failed. So it has a higher failure rate than ERP. And that's because there's this notion that you simply buy software and it's like a little blue pill. You know, I'm going to get better performance if I just take this MRM pill. Well, what I have found is that the systems, the companies that have done the best understand that they have no operational capability for deploying a new system. And in the case of Philips, General Motors, Hasbro, and a list goes on, inevitably I will find what I call a Ronin masterclass consultant. Ronin comes from the notion of a masterless samurai, right? An independent, full-time consultant on staff with one goal: to drive user acceptance of this new system. So if you're thinking about trying to kind of run these things, understand that unless you are a Six Sigma type of firm with a really strong project management office, you have no hope in hell of deploying MRM. Not going to happen. However, if you really want to start to use some of the MRM capabilities, understand that user acceptance, satisfaction, and change assurance are the two biggest problems to get over. And that you have to have a full-time leader just on that one problem. Okay. Oh, now there's another thing, two things. One is I really like the fact that Arizona actually puts a full-time staffer on a new client to run user acceptance and adoption. That's really smart. So I want to just acknowledge that that's a really smart thing for them to do. Now, there's another thing that's happening in North America. 10 years ago, if I looked at a firm that spent $100 million in marketing, 10 years ago, they spent $80 million of that through 5, maybe 7 or so agencies. They would have spent $80 million across 900 or so projects that would have run about 5 weeks in duration. And they would have had about 70 full-time headcount to spend that $100 million. Field marketing, corporate communications, all that kind of stuff. Today, in North America, companies have gotten so lean and mean that when we look at 80%, that $80 million, it's now spent across 75 agencies. Not 5, but 75. The average project has collapsed from 5 weeks to just barely a week. Instead of 900 projects, it's close to 4,000 projects with 30% fewer headcount. So you kind of put all that together. I'm trying to manage 10 times more vendor relationships, 5 times more projects, with 30% fewer headcount, and the projects are 1/5 in length. So now, Brazil has a different problem. The problem that I see that you have is you're growing along here 8-9% GDP growth. Fabulous. You can hide a lot of sins, a lot of mistakes when you have GDP growth at 8%. Plus, you got these two little things out here, the World Cup and the Olympics coming. So there'll be all this new money coming in to kind of fix up the infrastructure, the freeways, the communication systems. Yeah, you'll finally get your 3G mobile networks all up and running just in time, you know? So there's a lot of really good stuff in here. The big problem that Brazilians have today is how do you capture the growth? How do you ride that tsunami? And the only way that you're going to be able to ride that tsunami and really grow with the opportunity is to automate core processes in your marketing. So the value proposition for marketing automation isn't about cost savings. It's about how do you ride the growth. Okay. Now another thing that Suresh was talking about was buying software. I will say something as politely as I can. Buying software is just stupid. It's dumb. It's really, really dumb. And in 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 or 5, it'll be so dumb, it will be considered a breach of fiduciary responsibility. I'll say that again. Buying enterprise-class software 5 years from now will probably be a breach of fiduciary responsibility. That means that you, the managing director, gets fired, his kids no longer can go to private school, and you get kicked out of the country club. I don't know how to jump any more emphatically. So now, let's put some dollars and cents with that. A full MRM system, when you take all the software, hardware, all the professional services, the maintenance, and all that's hooty-doo, by North American costs, I got this at 2 drug companies, so I have really good data, $777 per user per month. That's the fully burdened cost, the total cost of service to run MRM software. $777 a month per person. And yet, we see similar software that's available out of the cloud, it's available on demand, that starts at $70 a month and goes down to $7 a month. Same function, actually better, more function for 1/10 to 1/100th of the cost. If that doesn't smell like a breach of fiduciary responsibility, I just don't know. So, fundamentally, companies are in the business of winning business by having differentiated project and capturing value. Increasingly, operational capabilities require an innovation leader to drive these new innovations into the organization. And that fundamentally, it's not about software, it's about capabilities. Who's going to do what in this new work configuration? Okay, quickly. So B2B firms. Now, how many people here are from B2B firms, sell to other businesses? Handful? Handful? Okay, great. So what I've tried to do here is to quickly summarize the criteria that B2B firms use to prioritize their investments in marketing. First of all, they're all about lead generation. Increasingly, it's about scoring sales prospects so that field sales will follow up on them. It's about account management. Automated upsell, cross-sell, great. So that means you have a really good CRM system, really good newsletter system. Strong analysis, very strong on analysis, because I've got very distinct events. I generated 425 leads, 380 of them qualified. Of the 380 qualified, 22 converted this month. You got the data. So that's why they are typically leading the way in terms of analysis-driven, multi-channel direct marketing campaigns. And the fellow that follows me, Barry, will talk, Barry from ITM will talk about this. Strong database analytics, this notion of customized communications, and rapid launch of microsites. Now, B2C firms, they focus on rapid launches, new products, packaging, formulations, seasonal things. They really look for building the brand equities because they don't typically have a direct relationship with consumers. Or if they do, there's so many consumers they have difficulty really understanding who's one from another. They really focus on promotional trade campaigns with close coordination. Things like review and approval of copy and content and packaging. And the other thing that B2C firms really focus on is word-of-mouth buzz, which is why B2C firms have paced the industry in terms of adoption of social media, because they wanted to have a more direct interaction with consumers. And why they've been the largest adopters of social media monitoring. Who's saying what, right? Mood of the market, voice of the customer, patterns of engagement. And then lastly, they look for fast cycle engagement, where now many of the consumer firms that we know in North America are now thinking of campaigns in 4 hours. They come in the morning, they look at the data, okay, boom, and then they execute that afternoon. So the notion of 4-hour campaigns completely busts up the typical agency model. Okay, so this leads to violent reallocations of budgets across smaller and smaller firms, more diverse group of execution, and promotional firms. So, B2C firms have their own things they're dealing with. Retail firms. Point is, they've got point of sale transaction data. Great. How do we convert that into insights and messages? Rapid customization, in-store shopper marketing, automated database publishing, continuous improvement, private label brands. So one of the interesting things that's going to be most disruptive in the retail space is what I call the mobile social consumer. I don't know how retailers are going to really engage mobile social consumers, but it's going to be a big deal, and fundamentally, if you sell into a retail organization, or if you are a retail organization, you ought to have a killer app, a killer iPad, Android app. Okay, quickly, a couple of innovations. Alex and I were having a conversation around what's the largest, most disruptive aspect that marketers are grappling with today. And it's been written about in terms of Moore's Law, but Eric Google said it really brilliantly. He said, here I got a phone. 5 years from now, this is going to be 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper. In 10 years, it's 100 times faster or 100 times cheaper. In 15, it's 1,000. So what that means is that consumers are going to be riding that accelerating curve of innovation. They're going to be consuming 10 times more content and services 5 years from now than they are today. Wow. This is going to say, and now here's another effect of Google. It basically makes hyper-efficient market spaces. In fact, more and more, customers reach out to find you as opposed to you finding them. And consumers are getting really habituated into this habit of mind called, if I don't want it now, I don't want it. Now, I know that's kind of a oxymoron or a tautology, but it really is. If I don't want it now, I don't want to hear about it. So so one of the interesting implications of this is that in the next 5 years, there's going to be a tsunami. There's going to be a 9/11. There's going to be a volcano blow up. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 years. The technical term, there's going to be a black swan. There's going to be something that happens, and 50% of all paid advertising that's in print and broadcast will disappear and never come back. I don't know when, but I know sometime between now and 5 years from now, there's going to be an upside down. And so so as a marketer, I say, okay, given that, what do? We must develop operational excellence in customer engagement. We must become truly excellent in terms of having systems, processes, and accountabilities for how do we systematically attract, serve, and keep profitable customers for life. And so that's the challenge for us today. And so fundamentally what this means is that it's no longer enough just to have really great media plans and marketing mixes and great messages. Yep, that's working the business. Now we need to also then work on the business. So let me show you. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to skip this one too because I'm running out of time, and I want to get right to this. This is a model that I've derived from Kaplan and Norton. It's called Mastering the Management System by Kaplan and Norton. Kaplan and Norton are the guys that came up with the balanced scorecard and strategy maps. And it's very simple. He says, let's think about strategy as another resource to manage. So what's the system we would use to manage strategies? So you can work this at the level of a business, or you can work this at the level of a campaign. So stage one, we develop a strategy. We translate that strategy into a plan. Objectives, themes, measurements, select strategic initiatives. We then plan the operations. This is the part that we almost always screw up. We do not plan the operations. Who's going to do what in this new regime? And that goes into an operating plan, dashboards, budgets, pro forma P&Ls, okay? It includes a full assessment in terms of here are the skills that we need to have on board, whether we retrain somebody internally or we hire somebody. This is the weakest link in marketing today, the lack of a fact-based operating plan that says when I grow here, I need to onboard a librarian to manage all the marketing content. I need to onboard an analytics decision theorist to run these real-time marketing campaigns, whatever your requirements are. So then we start executing these things and initiatives. We learn and monitor. Then we start testing. You can see how it goes around and around. So let me tell you one story to really illustrate how, two stories to illustrate this. So as a young pup, 28 years old, I had the fortune or misfortune of working at an advertising agency called Regis McKenna. And I worked on the Apple account and on the Intel account. And the Intel account was really interesting. Every quarter, we would be pulled into a company-wide meeting of the entire marketing group into what they call a quarterly management review, or a QMAR. Now, they do something different now, but then what there was, where they had the managing directors of all the lines of business, and each product manager would stand up in front of the entire company and saying, last quarter, I said this. I was going to do X, Y, and Z. Here's what I did, and here was the result. Here's my plan going forward. Any suggestions? Well, needless to say, Andy Grove is a pretty abrasive guy, and it was like gladiators going at each other. But the point was there was an operating plan. They had a structure in place by which to review the actual operations of the marketing. Okay. Now, I happened to ask Andy, what's the most important thing that you do? And he says, well, the CEO has 3 principal jobs. If they have any more than this, you got a company in trouble. I go to meetings and listen. I tell stories, and I nudge people. And then he said, the most important thing that I can control is the structure and cadence of a meeting. And later in his book, One-to-One High Output Management, he then expands upon that, and he says, meetings are the primary managerial medium. If you're a manager, you must be a master of the meeting. And I suggest that what we do is we have in quarterly reviews, not only on how we're doing our messaging, but what are we doing to build operational capabilities. So there needs to be someone in the room that says, last quarter I said I would stand up this CRM system. Here's what I did. Here were the issues I had. Here's how I need some help. So that we really not just work the business, but we work on the business, building new operational capabilities. Now, that's going to be tough for a lot of marketers because we like doing marketing. So remember Shannon? You know the story I was telling about Shannon? Her father's Gary. So one of the areas that Gary had worked at after he left Disney and had his PhD, he worked a lot in criminal justice with police departments and sheriff's departments. And there was this one particular client up in the state of Washington where the police chief came to him and says, Gary, you know, I know we're working on this whole organizational realignment thing, but I've got another problem, a really pressing problem, and it's just, God, I'm at wit's end. If you could help me with this, I'd just... He said, well, what is it? He says, well, as the police force, we went from a five-day a week 8-hour day to a 4-day week, 10 hours a day, 5-10. So it went from a 5-8 to a 4-10. Okay? Now, the policemen love it because they actually get to have a day off. But the problem was, he said, that the repair depot, where the policemen take the cars to get them serviced, is still on a 5-8 program, and the depot manager is really adamant, nasty, about keeping to a schedule. As a result, I've got 6 patrolmen sitting on their hands because the cars are still stuck in the depot, and there isn't anything I can do to move him. Short of going to the mayor and having it be a nuclear incident, there's nothing. What can you do? And Gary says, well, I can solve that for you. I can have that solved within a week under 2 conditions. 1, I'm just letting you know, it's totally legal. 2, you cannot ask me what I'm going to do. So the police chief says, okay, I'm game. So he hires a 16-year-old kid, Jeff. And Jeff stands on the sidewalk where the police cars come in and out of the garage. And as the cars drive in, he's got a pad of paper, and he writes down the license plate and the time. And then when they leave, he writes down the license plate and the time. Just a simple note. Yeah. On the second day, the garage guy comes out, and he's a raging bull. He says, who the, you? Well, I'm Jeff. What the are you doing? Well, see, I'm just taking notes. Who the told you to do this? Gary. What the fuck is Gary? I don't know. He's the guy paying me $6 an hour. 2 days, the garage completely caught up. So if there's something that you want to change, count it. Just a simple activity-based count. How many phone calls did you take? How many of them did you answer? Sorry? Oh. So, at the end of the day, this whole elegant strategy management system comes down to counting the right things. And it doesn't have to be a big extent. Just count 4 or 5 things. Now, I don't know what those are for your organization, but I'll tell you, whatever change you want to make, you just want to have a baseline of, it takes us 6 weeks, 44 handoffs to get an approved ad out the door. Okay? 6 weeks, 45 handoffs, 7 people. With the new system, 5 people, 11 handoffs, 3 days. So then when you sit before the CFO and say, well, look, we could rip out this system, but we're going to go from that represents an additional operating cost of X. So just really simple counts. Okay. So let's do a quick summary. Transmedia brands, as I've defined them, will continue to replace traditional brand concepts. They'll be authentic, personal and cool, tribal, mobile, location-aware, interactive. And oh yeah, by the way, it'll be a native Facebook app. All these traditional categories are going to begin looking a lot like each other, unified by the customer engagement. The disruptive innovations, social mobile consumers, engagement cycle technologies that allow us to run 4-hour campaigns, and then process integration of marketing and customer engagement. So the big decisions, of course, are make, buy, or build. Well, I've already laid out the case. If you're buying software, we need to find you a new job. It's just dumb. And the question is, who owns the transmedia brand? So, what are the next steps? Let's build a science-based model for your brand. What's its architecture? Let's really define it as a building with a set of blueprints. Let's model the primary satisfaction in the 3 parts of the brain. Let's map each stakeholder group to a singular satisfaction, like that girl in Tennessee Valley. Ooh, I bought an iMac. Whatever that is. Use viral videos and social media monitoring to engage consumers in conversations way before they become customers. Capture and summarize exactly what types of customers, what various types of customers say about you, and then map that voice of the customer to phases of your customer engagement cycle. Now, as you're doing those little tactical things, what we really want to build is an operational capability through operational business plans. So, I began my presentation this morning. I began my presentation this morning about my experience, and unfortunately it was a little raw, but my experience of encountering Keith Jarrett and how it moved me, and how that is the job for innovators and brand advocates today, is to be able to connect imaginations. Connect your imagination with the imagination of your customers. And that, first of all, that first starts in our mind. It first starts in our hearts and in our souls. So if you do not have the courage or the authenticity or the gumption simply to say, I love my customer, then you're in the wrong business. You're just in the wrong business. Because your customers will increasingly get that you're just using them. And they will switch to somebody who really does get that we are in relationship, that we're in the same canoe. There's no such thing as your half of the canoe is sinking. We're in this together. So one last story. I worked with a fellow named Jeff Martin at a company called Tribal Brands for 2 years. And Jeff also worked for Steve Jobs for a good 3 years. You know, one night, late night in Helsinki, he says, you know, Michael, a lot of people think that Steve is a great innovator. He says, he can't innovate worth shit. He doesn't actually do anything. But I'll tell you what he is. He's a brilliant editor of other people's ideas. And what makes him brilliant is his exquisite taste. Never underestimate the power of an inspired editor with great taste. And that's the coda for brands at ITM 4. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
It's not just a question. For sure, you didn't have time to tell us another story. Please tell it.
Okay.
About Guaraná.
One story. So, as I shared, I worked with Regis McKenna on the Apple account in 1979. And at that point, the Apple II was really, really successful. We were in the process of launching the Apple III, which was going to be a dead, and my project with Lisa, which was to come. And in this room, conference room, there's Steve Jobs and his entourage roll in, and we start talking about how we're going to position the Apple III vis-a-vis the Apple II. And positioning was still a relatively new idea. It's originally coined by and written about by Jack Trout and Reese, Al Reese and Jack Trout. And after about 3 or 4 minutes of really kind of stupid conversation around what the positioning was, Steve erupts. He goes, "Cut the crap. I'll tell you what positioning is." Quiet. If we took all 5 million of our Apple II customers and asked them, what's the one thing you most love about your Apple? And we're to take those 5 million comments and boil them down into one phrase. That's positioning. Damn, if that's not right. Now, remember this molecule that I showed you? The transmedia molecule? Well, think of that as a flywheel. And think of that as rotating 50,000 RPM. So the inertial mass in that is huge. That is Steve Jobs. He has the love of customers wound up in product design, messaging, and relationship. He has the love of customers rotating, spinning in his being with the inertial mass of 50,000 RPM, which is why whenever someone comes around that's kind of not up to speed with him, boom, they find themselves a mile away in the parking lot. He has zero tolerance for anything that is not consistent and resonates at that same level, which is how he's able to create hit after hit after hit. That's our job. Our job is to understand that we are in the love business. And it is our job to maintain the relationship and have the relationship guide our action and deed.
You talked about open source ideation, something that happens quite a lot, including in the open source model of distributed design and development of software of old times. Do you think we're going to see anything close to crowdsourced brand forging in social networks, independent of leaders and editors like Jobs and
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are we going to see
crowdsourced brand forging without editors like Steve and others?
Well, let's go back to the most successful open source brand, Linux. And there's this exquisite editor with taste called Linus Torvalds. So otherwise, you just have chaos. So whether you, I don't believe that you will have a sustainable open source brand without at least a curator and probably without an editor with some degree of taste. My opinion.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.